So this video tutorial is just a little bit of a review, because you did this last year, on how to solve multi-step equations. So how to solve equations when you have to do a combination of adding and subtracting and then multiplying and dividing. So your first step, if we look at problem A, our goal is to keep our letters on the left and our numbers on the right. And so if we look at letter A, we have a +5 on the left-hand side, and we don't want that. We just want it to say something with an X on that side. So we need to get rid of adding 5. To get rid of adding 5, we subtract 5. If you subtract 5 from the left-hand side, you have to subtract 5 from the right-hand side. And then you just simplify your answer. And you'll be left with -3x equals 18. So now this becomes just like some of these simple equations that you were doing yesterday. And to get rid of multiplying by -3, you divide by -3. If I divide the left-hand side by -3, I need to divide the right-hand side by -3. And I will end up with the answer x equals -6. Now, the next problem is exactly the same, but what I will show you is a different way of showing your work. So you know that you don't want subtracting 30. So to get rid of subtracting 30, you add 30 to both sides. Well, if I add 30 to the left-hand side, I'm just going to end up with 5x. And then on the right-hand side, I'm going to show that I added 30. So it's exactly the same thing. I'm just showing the work in a slightly different way, and you can choose which way you prefer. And now my next step, I'm just going to simplify. So -45 plus 30 is -15. And again, now to get x by itself, I'm going to divide by whatever's with the x. In this case, it happens to be 5. And my final answer will be x equals -3. So you can kind of compare both of those. I'm doing the exact same thing, but instead of showing the add 30, I know that that's just going to equal 0. So essentially I've just canceled out that, and I've shown it just a slightly different way. So example C, the first thing that you would have to do for example C is collect your like terms and simplify. So 3m minus 5m is -2m. And then again, you want to get rid of adding 2. To get rid of add 2, you subtract 2. If you do it from one side, you have to do it to the other side. And then again, you simplify. And then you divide both sides by -2. And you'll get your final answer of m equals -6. And for letter D, again, I'll show you a different way of showing the work. So my first step, again, is to think about getting rid of subtracting 6. I do that by adding 6. But I know if I add 6 to that side, I'm just going to get 0. So I'm just going to write it as m divided by 5 equals, because -6 plus 6 is 0. And on the right-hand side, I'm going to write -18 plus 3 plus 6. So again, just a slightly different way of showing work. You have to decide which way you prefer. And now I'm going to simplify. So -18 plus 3 is -15. -15 plus 6 is -9. And this one's a little bit trickier because, remember, this means m divided by 5. So to get rid of dividing by 5, you multiply. And if you multiply one side by 5, you have to multiply the other side by 5. And you'll end up with m equals -45. So you're going to have to do a little bit of experimenting with which way of showing work that you prefer. It really doesn't matter how you show your work. It is important that you show each step of your work, but there's choices in how you do so. There's one final thing I want to talk about, and that's something called a formal check. And this is something new to you, but it's a way in math that you can go through the process of checking to see if your answer is correct or not. And you can do this informally for every question, but if a question asks you to do a formal check, I'm going to show you the process of doing that here. So this particular one was for part C, and if we recall, the answer to part C was m equals -6. And what we're going to do is we're going to check to see if that's right or not. The first step of a formal check is to split your equation up into the left side of the equation and the right side of the equation. So in this case, the left side of the equation is 3m minus 5m plus 2, and the right side is 14. You always want to split up your left and right based on the original equation. Your second step now is to substitute in the answer, m equals -6, that you got when you solved the problem. So 3 times -6 minus 5 times -6 plus 2. And on the right hand side, I don't actually have to do anything, but sometimes you will. And now I'm going to simplify. So that becomes -18 plus 30 plus 2. And I've actually figured out what that is. That equals 14. So now what I have to do is I have to compare my left side to my right side. And this is where you have to just be careful. It doesn't matter what the left side equals and what the right side equals. All that matters is that they are equal to each other. If they're equal to each other, you know that your solution is correct. So in this case, my left side is 14, and so is my right side. So I know that m equals -6 is the correct answer. So now to finish it up, I just need to do a concluding statement. So my concluding statement will be left side equals right side. Therefore, m must be equal to -6. And that's kind of like my conclusion. It's saying, I know that my answer is correct. So you would do this process anytime a question asked you to do a formal check. You could go through this process anytime informally to check to see if you're right or not.